In Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and even Afghanistan, where we presided over a constitution written by moderates, radical concepts such as the death penalty for blasphemy or apostasy are the law of the land. A survey in Britain after the subway bombing showed that 20% of the Muslim population in Britain approved of the violence. Now, some libertarians argue that Western occupation and intervention fans the flames of radical Islam. I agree. But I don't agree that absent Western occupation, that radical Islam goes quietly into that good night. I don't agree with FDR's Vice President Henry Wallace that the Soviets, or radical Islam in today's case, can be discouraged by the glad hand and the winning smile. Americans need to understand that Islam has a long and perseverant memory. As Bernard Lewis writes, the general level of historical knowledge in American society is abysmally low. The Muslim peoples, like everyone else in the world, are shaped by their history, but unlike some others, they are keenly aware of it. Radical Islam is no fleeting fad, but rather a relentless force. Though at times stateless, radical Islam is also supported by radicalized nations such as Iran. Though often militarily weak, radical Islam makes up for this lack of conventional armies with unlimited zeal. For Americans to grasp the mindset of radical Islam, we need to understand that they're still hopping mad about a massacre at Karbala some 1,300 years ago. Meanwhile, many Americans are often more concerned with who's winning Dancing with the Stars. Over 50% of Americans still believe Iraq attacked us on 9/11. Until we understand the world around us, until we understand at least a modicum of what animates our enemies, we cannot defend ourselves and we cannot contain our enemies. To understand how we will contain radical Islam, we need to understand the longest, most dangerous war in our history, the Cold War. In February 1946, George Kennan sent a 5,000-word telegram heard round the world. The long telegram gained him instant and near universal fame, as it called for containment of the Soviet Union. Today I'm less ambitious, conscious that we live in a world that is lucky to read 140-character text, much less an essay of 5,000 words. I think all of us, though, have the duty to ask, where are the Kennans of our generation? When foreign policy has become so monolithic, so lacking in debate, that Republicans and Democrats routinely pass foreign policy statements without debate and without votes. Where are the calls for moderation, the calls for restraint? Anyone who questions the bipartisan consensus is immediately castigated, rebuked, and their patriotism challenged. One of the most pressing questions of the day, the possibility of Iran developing nuclear weapons, appears to have less debate in this country than it receives in Israel. In Israel, the current head of the Mossad, Tamir Pardo, states that we need to quit discussing Iran and nuclear weapons as an existential threat to Israel, as that confines us as to only one possible cataclysmic response. The former head of the Mossad, Meir Dagan, a war hero, also cautions of the unintended consequences of preemptive bombing of Iran, both the possibility that the strikes are ineffective and that Israel suffers a significant conventional missile response from Iran. Dagan said he did not advocate a preemptive strike against Iran's nuclear program anytime soon. Yuval Diskin, the former chief of Shin Bet, Israel's domestic security service, recently said that an attack against Iran might cause it to speed up its nuclear weapons. Iran's army's chief of staff suggested in an interview with the Israeli paper Haaretz that the Iranian nuclear threat was not quite as imminent as some have portrayed it. On the other side of the coin, Prime Minister Netanyahu does warn that Iran is on the verge of obtaining nuclear weapons. There is a real debate in Israel over what to do. These are not easy questions. It seems that the debate of Iran is more robust in Israel than it is here. I have voted for sanctions against Iran in the hope of preventing war and allowing for diplomacy. The sanctions have not been fully implemented, but they do appear to have brought Iran back to the negotiating table. I did, however, hold up further sanctions until Senator Reid added my amendment that states, nothing in this bill is to be interpreted as a declaration of war or as a use of authorization of force. The debate over war is the single most important debate that occurs in this country, and it should not be glossed over. I am persuaded, though, that for the sanctions to change Iran's behavior, we must have the commitment of Iran's major trading partners, China, Russia, Japan, India. Understandably, no one wants to imagine what happens if Iran develops nuclear weapons. But if we don't have at least some of that discussion now, the danger exists that war is the only remedy. No one, myself included, wants to see a nuclear Iran. Iran does need to know that all the options are on the table. But we should not preemptively announce that diplomacy or containment will never be an option. In a recent Senate resolution, the bipartisan consensus stated that we will never contain Iran should they get a nuclear weapon. In the debate, I made the point that while I think it unwise to declare that we will contain a nuclear Iran, we shouldn't announce that. I think it's equally unwise to say we will never contain a nuclear Iran. War should never be the only option. Let me be clear, I don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, but I also don't want to decide with certainty that war is the only option. Containment, though, should be discussed as an option with regard to a larger threat, the more generalized threat with radical Islam.
I yield 2.5 minutes to an American patriot, someone who's been relentless in his efforts to stop America from blundering into foreign adventures. Congressman Ron Paul from Texas.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I think this bill would be better named if we called it Obsession with Iran Act 2012. Because this is what we continue to be doing, is obsessed with Iran and the idea that Iran is a threat to our national security. Iran happens to be a third world nation. They have no significant Navy, Air Force, intercontinental ballistic missiles. The IAEA and our CIA said they're not on the verge of a nuclear weapon. It's so similar to what we went through in the early part of this last decade when we were beating the war drums to go to war against Iraq. And it was all a facade. There was no danger from Iraq. So this is what we're doing, beating the war drums once again. Now, since the bill has come back from the conference, we're going to deal with civil liberties in Syria. Well, I happen to be a civil libertarian. I'm very concerned about civil liberties. But let me tell you, this bill is not going to do anything to enhance the civil liberties of the individuals in Syria. Now, if we were really interested in civil liberties, why wouldn't we look to ourselves? Why wouldn't we look to the things that we do here? What about our warrantless searches under the Patriot Act? What about the policy of assassination and assassinating American citizens? What about arrest by the military, National Defense Authorization Act? What about the drone warfare that we go on? Do you think we're protecting civil liberties by arbitrarily dropping drones or threatening to drop drones any place in the world with innocent people dying? If we want to really care about civil liberties in Syria, why don't we care about the secret prisons we have and the history of torture that we've had in this country? What about the fact that kill lists are being made by the executive branch of government and we sit idly by and approve of it by saying nothing, and the American people put up with it, and we march in this direction, marching into a determination to have another war. When you put on sanctions on a country, it's an act of war, and that's what this is all about. The first thing you do when war breaks out between two countries is you put sanctions on them. You blockade the country. So this is an act of war. What would we do if somebody blockaded and put sanctions on us and prevented the importation of any product in this country? We'd be furious, we'd declare war, we'd go to war. So we are the antagonists. We're over there poking our nose in other people's affair, just looking for the chance to start another war. First it's Syria, then Iran. We have too many wars. We need to stop the wars. We don't have the money to fight these wars any longer. Gentlemen, for yielding. I'm still rather impressed with the obsession over a weapon that does not exist, and no concern whatsoever about many nuclear weapons that are held by countries that never even joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It is called for in the debate that Iran should end all its nuclear programs, but they're permitted to have their nuclear programs under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the other countries that have weapons, and including the countries that hold the weapons that came from the Soviet system, seems like that would be a much greater danger. You know, the investigation by the UN or by our CAs never indicated that they've ever enriched above 20%. And they said they won't even do it to 20% if they would merely allow it. The West would cooperate and sell them this material. They said, we don't need it, but we need 20% enrichment for nuclear isotopes, medical isotopes. So our refusal to deal with them prompts them to take it up enrichment to 20%. 5%, of course, is what they're allowed to do for nuclear energies. But this idea that we can badger people and then defy the law, what we're asking them to do is to close down their program is you're asking them to defy international law. They agreed to this. They have a right to do this under this treaty. And for us to come and say, well, they must quit it, I think it really is very close to an obsession on a country that is incapable of attacking us or attacking. They don't have a history of invading their neighboring countries. The last time they were at war was with Iraq, and we bugged Iraq to go into Iran. So I find this very distressing that the obsession continues. I find it very, very upsetting that this vote will, of course, be overwhelmingly in support of correcting the civil liberties of Syria and making Iran toe the line and give up on something that they're permitted to do. A vote for this, in my opinion, in time will show that it's just one more step to another war that we don't need. We have not been provoked. They are not a threat to our national security. And we should not be doing this. We've been doing it too long. For the last 10, 15 years, we're just obsessed with this idea that we go to war and try to solve all the problems of the world. At the same time, it is bankrupting us. I strongly urge a no vote on this resolution.